Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Missa Gallivan. Today on the show, we're talking about the critical importance of play in the lives of young people, though, of course, children are not the only beneficiaries of play. Far from being all fun and games, however, I'm going to tell you how play affects children, and more importantly, what happens when children are not allowed to play. More and more, the educational world seems to be focused on outcomes. Before my son was even born, a nurse in the doctor's office asked me if I had secured him in a spot in a quote-unquote good preschool. "They need that leg up," she said to me when I stared at her in disbelief, "to get into college." Unfortunately, her perspective is not rare. Children are being groomed, prepped, molded, taught, and shaped before they are even of an age to attend school, all in the service of being ready. And what we are seeing at Alpine Valley School is that along the path to being ready, children are losing access to their childhoods. Dr. Peter Gray, a psychologist and an author, has long been a friend to Alpine Valley School. His book, Free to Learn, is a resource we turn to again and again when trying to help people learn about and understand our school. In addition to being a personal story of his own family and their journey to Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts, Dr. Gray also documents Sudbury education from an anthropological and psychological perspective, exploring the benefits of schools like ours taken as a whole. I'll share a link to the book, Free to Learn, in the show notes. If you are at all interested in the work we do at Alpine Valley, this is a book you should not miss. In his book, Dr. Gray writes, "We have forgotten that children are designed by nature to learn through self-directed play and exploration. And so, more and more, we deprive them of the freedom to learn, subjecting them instead to the tedious and painfully slow learning method devised by those who run the schools." And indeed, it can be difficult as an adult to watch a group of children playing tag and see that as a learning experience. More than likely, no one is practicing their multiplication tables as part of the activity. But what they are taking in is even more important. They're learning what real freedom feels like, what it means to take responsibility for their actions and their role in a community. They're learning how to get along with others, how to structure activities so that everyone can enjoy themselves, and how to craft a set of rules that all can agree upon. And, more often than not, they are deciding how to handle conflict and seek justice should a participant break the agreed-upon rules. Children as young as 5 years old are determining how to interact in a free society and finding their place. My guest on the show today is AVS graduate Jessie Alford, who many AVS students, past and present, know only as the inventor of the Asteroid Game. Among his other varied contributions to the school, Jessie dreamed up a free-form role-playing game that is still played and loved by students today, long after his graduation from the school in 2005. I got the chance to ask him how the Asteroid Game came to be, along with his many other experiences of play as a student. Here's our conversation. Hi, Jessie. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Missa.
Hi. Let me start by having you introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your history with Alpine Valley.
Sure. So I'm Jessie Alford. I went to Alpine Valley School over a decade ago. I work in San Francisco for a software company called Pivotal Software on open source on an open source platform as a service called Cloud Foundry. If you're a cloud person, that's all very exciting. If you're not a cloud person, the important thing to know is that all of us cloud people are very happy for each other. There's a lot more, but I wouldn't want to try and summarize it.
Sure. So how old were you when you first came to AVS? Do you remember?
Oh, I guess 11 or 12.
And where had you been before that? What was your schooling career like?
I had been at a Montessori school in Evergreen called Montessori Children's House. And that was pretty fine for a while, and had been getting worse and worse because I was not inclined to do things like homework or assignments or sitting even really, when other people thought those things would be a good idea. And they'd been trying to enlist my parents and especially my mother in securing my compliance with their ideas about what I should be doing. And she didn't like the dynamic that was creating in our family. So that was probably, I was at Montessori Children's House from kindergarten and maybe a little bit of preschool. I can't remember, through 5th grade or part of 5th grade. And then escaped Alpine Valley.
Do you remember what led your family to make that escape? Like how they found out about the school, that sort of thing?
I think that part of the coping strategy for dealing with the way that I was at the Montessori school was that we had a right brain coach, I think he called himself, Jeffrey Freed, who helped me do math and some other things that I was very good at, but also very bad at in ways that baffled people. So I think we started seeing this guy when the teachers went from the story that I was bad at math to the story that I did poorly on pure math problems and 100% on story problems, and that they did not understand that. That was very confusing for them. And so I worked with him, and I think he had worked with a couple of other students, and I'm not sure how, but he became aware of Alpine Valley School and actually suggested it to the mother of one of the other students he was working with, who was friends with my mother, so it wasn't, she, didn't think it was a good fit for her son, but my mom thought it might be a good fit for me. And she tells the story of she called the school and asked if they had a program for gifted children. And of course, one of the students answered and said, well, you're talking to one of them. So that was,
really?
Yeah.
I wonder who that was.
That was Lewis. Was
it really? Yeah. That's funny. Wow. We're all sort of gifted, I suppose. How funny. So do you recall reading the literature at all, or just kind of jumping in and trying it out?
I remember a tour of that old building where we were sharing space with the Unitarian Church, and that there would be computers that I was able to use, and that people would not make me do things. And the playground there I really liked because it was very good for wandering, which is was and remains one of my favorite activities, just sort of meandering around, and it had a very good playground for that. I don't think that's something they intentionally structure playgrounds for. It just got that way.
Perhaps they should, though.
It had like a bridge and some towers that I could pretend were crumbling, and that's all I've ever really asked for.
Excellent.
I don't really remember the literature.
Well, you were 11. Yeah, I just wondered if maybe
I ended up reading Free at Last and things like that, but it seemed fairly self-evident and straightforward to me that I should be able to do things, and here I would be allowed to do things. So, case closed.
Yeah. So aside from wandering, what do you remember about the activities that you did at school?
There was, honestly, especially in the beginning, quite a lot of wandering and reading. So I had a Micro Machines Defiant, a little plastic spaceship of the Star Trek ship. And Star Wars ones too, but that was the main one because it was flat and it would sit in my pocket. And I would fly that around out just by myself, out on the playground, landing and taking off of various play structure pieces and reading. And as I got more comfortable there and got a little bit, got the wandering kind of done, it took a few months. You need solid wandering when you've been denied your wandering.
For sure.
But it didn't take too long to discover there was another student who introduced me to Magic the Gathering, and then that was very exciting, and I spent a lot of time wanting to play that and recruiting other people into it and building decks that I could loan out so that people who were less enthusiastic about it than me could still play. And then shortly thereafter, Dungeons and Dragons, which I ended up spending a great deal of time doing. And then eventually I figured out that I could sell snack cakes, and I started selling those to accumulate enough money to buy a television that I could have at school, because we didn't have one, so that I could play Sega. And I ended up playing a lot of video games at school too. And as time progressed, we started a writing class, and I spent a lot of time doing that too. But the reading and wandering remained very important points throughout sort of the medium in which all of these other activities drifted.
That's interesting.
I got a little bit into computer programming in like the first year. There was a staff member who was willing to show me some BASIC on one of our old computers that had it. And I think it's really funny because that didn't really take. I didn't come back to that at the time that I was at AVS.
But of course, that's a big part of your life now, right?
Absolutely.
Would you, if you could look back on a particular point in time, so like, let's say, when you were in your kind of mid-teens, would you say that there was kind of a typical day, something that you could characterize as a typical day for you?
Sure. So it's easiest for me to remember the time when the rhythm was the most similar, where I would be able to come into school and read or hang out. There was a bunch of socializing in the main room, and I imagine this is still a recurring theme in stories about
definitely
schools. There's a set of couches, or there were, probably still are, and a ring of couches and a ring of seats around a table, and both of these are like conversation zones that can maintain their own little thing, and they can kind of cross over or merge or migrate, but you can have basically two big main room conversations going on. And these are just free ranging talks about whatever. And they can take a pretty strongly philosophical or systems oriented type turns, or strongly absurd turns, and everything in between. So that was usually how I'd start. I often had a book to read, so I'd just read in the main room and listen for something to become involved in, or sometimes eat in there. By that time, I think we had gotten our network set up in the gaming room, and a couple of TVs, not just that tiny one that I initially had bought a couple years before, and some Xboxes, and we could play, this is before Xbox Live, but we could play local multiplayer Halo. And we often did for many hours, because that was the best multiplayer experience that I had ever had access to. It's fairly common to do these large distributed versus team games over the internet now, but that was not technically common at the time, and having the ability to set up some multiple Xboxes over a local network and play coordinated team games like Capture the Flag with actual friends who were there with you was something that I think a lot of people didn't have nearly as much time of their life where that was a thing as I did, of like the constant LAN party that was school. And then we also had, so one of the things that goes on with age mixing is that if you want to get a group activity going, if you want to have something substantial in motion, you have to have people who aren't just the like four kids who are your age. There can be more than that, but if you want to get a group thing going, you've got to have kids younger and older. And games like Halo or D&D or Magic all have aspects that make it a little bit hard to get a large group like that. But I do remember that we had a game that we would play out in the sandbox at first, and then later in the theater with the Kapla blocks, that I'm not sure exactly why this was the moniker that stuck, but we called it the Asteroid Game. And this was a straight line from the fiction of the video games that I was playing. Oh, I forgot that I spent a bunch of time playing Marathon and Myth before that. It's a transitional period. I love those games. So
I didn't forget.
Well, I suspect it's hard for anyone else to forget. It's hard for me to forget. I'm surprised I did. But there's a straight line from the fiction of those games to the stories that we would tell in the Asteroid Game, or that I would tell. So it was a storytelling game out in the sandbox where, 2 to 10 kids would participate in this sort of competitive / collaborative shared fiction and sandcastle building, where they'd have sections of the sandbox where they'd build representations of settlements. And the Asteroid Game, the initial idea, the reason it had that name was that there was an asteroid in orbit that had all kinds of good things on it that they were refugees from, that they had fallen from this asteroid onto an alien or barren planet. The particulars varied from game to game. That was part of the fun, is like, what happened this time? What's this instance? But I had all these little bits of fun machinery from things that I had taken apart, whether it was motors or chips of RAM or lots of motors. Like the small electronics motors make very interesting things when you zoom them out to the monolithic structure level and bury them half in sand in the middle of a desert looking sandbox. It's like, yeah, I can build a city around that. So you'd have this debris coming from the asteroid, and you would tell the story of how your faction or your people or your race, depending on, how the fiction split people up, would make use of these things coming from the sky to try and survive and figure out what was going on and advance or expand or, whatever. It's a very flexible give and take where there's not a rigid rule system around it where people have a sense of fairness. Like there's no dice that get compared against each other in a game like that. But people will say, hey, Jessie, what's this thing? Like I built a thing. And the implicit contract is the cooler the thing is and the more excited I am about how cool it is, the better it has to be in the fiction. And so my job was basically living up to that promise for a bunch of people at once, where the fairness would come from, yeah, he did build a pretty cool thing. Like I do understand that his warriors beat mine because they have a bear barracks where they raise bears, and that makes sense. I should have built a bear barracks. I don't know what I was thinking. So I both in the sandbox and then later with the Capla Blocks version that we've did indoors, I wouldn't say that it was typical, but that's a lot of those games register high points on my memories of like, I can have a lot of distinct moments where getting one of those together and playing, outside or inside for 5 or 6 hours in a couple of sessions, maybe breaking for JC, either to serve on it or to testify or face judgment, reconciliation. And then the other typical, but not like typical sometimes, it wasn't every day, but of course there's chores that intrudes on my consciousness here is another thing that, would break up the game at the end of the day, is everyone has to run off and attend to their school maintenance responsibilities. And then maybe they come back or maybe they get picked up and it all tapers off. And I hope that the story was done by then because it's probably not going to survive until tomorrow.
So I think it's interesting because I don't know that any of us graduates, or at least not many, can say that we've had such a clear legacy as you do with the Asteroid Game, because the kids still play it. And, you graduated a while ago, and to this day, at least, until summertime started, they were playing the Asteroid Game, I would say, once a week to every 2 weeks.
I wonder how different it is.
Probably pretty different from what you described. It sounds like it's evolved because the storyteller has changed hands a couple of times. But it's still like foundationally sounds like it's basically the same game. And although I would say that these days it's mostly played indoors.
I remember after I left or as I was leaving, an interesting thing for me is I never played the Asteroid Game as not the storyteller. I have never. I did collaborate with a couple of students who wanted to learn to do it, to try and give them some guidance about what the storyteller was about and how to run it, which was often not as satisfying an experience for them as they wanted. I felt it's hard to tell, and maybe I was being too tough on myself because what I learned was everyone thought that there was a stronger system than there was.
You made it look like there was so much structure.
Right. And I actually think that in other games, because I still love games, and there's lots of rule sets for role-playing games and for board games and computer games that are highly systems-based. Lots of games pull this trick where they make you think that there is more of a system than there is, and you think that some of the internal logic is actually contributed by the players who attribute it to the system or to the person running it. So I'd be very interested to see, having had sort of limited success from my perspective, communicating exactly what I thought this thing was about, what they found out that it was actually about for them as the years went on, and that, transition process happened repeatedly, completely apart from me. That's very interesting. I'd love to see them play it sometime.
Yeah, well, you should come visit, because the storyteller up until recently has now graduated, so that torch will have changed hands again next year.
If they keep playing it.
I can only assume they do based on its popularity. So in your mind, were there any benefits from how much you spent, or how much time you spent playing games, like, to you? Absolutely.
So I can start with, I work in agile software development, not just software development. The thing that I tell people to distinguish it is the movie Office Space, with those miserable office drones, is about programmers, but it's not like that anymore. It's this very dynamic, or it can be. It is like that for some people, I'm afraid, but it can be this very dynamic, collaborative, high agency work, and it begins to again have a lot of the systems perspective and collaboration skills, and seeking that implicit contract, or the call of what someone has created, what they want from you in having made something, is absolutely vital to collaborative systems work, which is software, which is any sort of collaborative project, IT or otherwise, where you're trying to establish a large system for people to coordinate their efforts. I wouldn't say that it's directly applicable in the sense that I can go and say, like, yes, this one time I played the Asteroid Game and now I can solve a problem, and then the person directing my life will have a flashback to when I learned to solve that problem by playing that. But you could almost do that, with a little bit of artistic license and some audience contribution of believing in the metaphor. The clear line to me between collaborative systems, implicit and explicit, that we call into existence and manipulate and engage with when we're playing those sorts of games, and the exact same dynamics with different clothes on that we engage with as adults, especially in the more pleasant to work in environments where you have more autonomy and you have more responsibility to communicate and understand and empathize with each other, is a vivid connection for me. I also would say that when I talk with my coworkers in this environment, to those who are thoughtful for a moment about what that really means, about what my school experience implies, very quickly become deeply jealous about how much time I got to spend playing games. Not because it was fun or slacking off or whatever, but because a lot of system-oriented, very technical, very smart people, some of their best memories of childhood are playing games of this sort, and they wish they had more of that time, that memory, that experience in their lives.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things that we struggle with as staff members is trying to communicate that experience to parents without the benefits of hard data that we can quantify. Like, we can't say, here's your students' grades, and here are their test scores, and here's how they compare to their peers, and therefore we are doing a good job because they are good and they are better than their peers or equal to them or whatever. And so looking at, an AVS education and saying to a person, like, yes, your child buried computer parts in the sandbox all day today, and that's going to make them successful later in their life, is a hard thing when you're in the moment and you don't have that hindsight. And do you have any insights on how to communicate that differently?
Well, so I have, I can't decide if it's a disheartening or a very heartening piece of factual belief or belief about facts that I've built up, that schooling to prepare people for adulthood isn't that important. That how people do in school and all the things that they learn in high school and college even, and there's a fair amount of research around this. The impact on outcomes in just at the aggregate, like the statistical level, is dwarfed by other things. It's dominated by other things, socioeconomic things and things about home life and that kind of thing. And I perhaps have the privilege, having been at AVS, of having a cadre of fellows whose parents cared enough to try and find something like this for them. Parents who were thinking about the kids' experience of life enough to say, I don't want this terrible thing in various ways. The alternatives are terrible. They're a terrible experience, and kids manifest this in various pains that they express to their parents. So there's a selection bias, I guess, is what I'm saying, in people who tend to come to AVS, and I suspect that they'll end up doing very well. But to me, the key to thinking about AVS isn't some measurement or metric that you could find, or some even argument parallel to that, where it's like, yes, well, we don't measure standardized test scores, but we have these things that we watch, that we see kids doing, that we have stories about why they're good. I don't know if it's satisfying to parents, but my answer is, no, the important thing is for people to have good experiences. Like, that's what your childhood is something that you fall back on and call back to throughout your adult life. And the memorizing a times table isn't part of that so much. The particular experiences and memories that you have and the way that those experiences changed you is what's important. And so I have a really hard time answering questions about raw success metrics or alternatives, because that to me is a sort of an unarguable narrative. It's like, well, if you care about that and you can't be persuaded to not care about that, if you can't be persuaded that that is not what's most important, then I don't know. I can really only give you ostensive evidence and say, look at these successful people. Look at these happy people who came out of AVS and who treasured their time there and had happy childhoods. Because that might be the actual product of AVS is, children who had happy childhoods instead of very conflicted relationships with school, or dysfunctions that they spend a lot of years getting over around trying to learn to the test or answer to the teacher, instead of having authentic engagement with their interests and knowledge and the world and systems and each other.
Wow, what a great way to put that. I have never heard it put quite that way. I think that's super interesting. So shifting gears just a little bit, when your AVS career was coming to an end, what do you remember about your graduation, about the graduation process?
Well, I have a better answer. Was it my graduation? I have a different memory that isn't about that I should share, or something else, because it was the first thing that came to mind. But about my graduation, I remember that it felt very, very good to write this paper that is sort of a life philosophy summation. And some, students treat it more or less that way, this thesis defense. But you need to write a defense of the thesis. I flub the wording here sometimes, that you've taken responsibility to prepare yourself to be an adult in the wider community. I think it's something very close to.
You only left out the word effective. An effective adult.
Effective adult. And I guess I know well enough by now that effectiveness is not implicit in adulthood. So that writing process, for me, I had been doing a writing class where I'd mostly been writing, in retrospect, fairly bad Heinlein pastiche for a few years. Was enough preparation, I guess, that and journaling, so that I wasn't struggling with the form of writing this persuasive essay, which is something that I had not undertaken, I think, ever before that. But that was fine. And it was very satisfying to try and work through this. And I was going through sort of an Ayn Rand phase, and I didn't want to just write like objectivist philosophy for my thesis defense, but I also was strongly influenced by the time and wanted to put that kind of thing into my own words. So there was this very interesting process of synthesis and trying to like authentically describe ideas that I felt were mine. And it felt very good to defend. I remember standing on the stage and taking questions in front of the school community after having given the spoken part of the defense, and feeling very, like, after I was done, feeling like I wanted to do it again. And I felt like that for a while afterwards, that was something that I would love to be able to do periodically, to sort of summarize my life, my view of life and my experience and my goodness and my worthiness to a group of people, and have them think about it critically and question me closely and then declare me good enough. That was nice.
Yeah. I think I could stand to do that again too. You put it that way.
And that is not how everyone perceives the process or experiences it. But it's definitely how I felt about it.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about what you're doing with your life these days. So you talked about your work a little bit. So if you could say maybe more about that, and kind of if you have any hobbies or interests that you're pursuing that might be interesting.
Sure. So I work for Pivotal, and Pivotal has an enviable reputation amongst software companies because it's based out of Pivotal Labs, which was an agile consultancy. It is still an agile consultancy within Pivotal that has been widely recognized as leading the way on modern development practices or agile development practices, depending on, which portion of the, I want to say keyword. That's not quite the right word. Buzzword. Which part of the buzzword cycle you're in. And they've been around since almost as long as I have. I think like 1989 or something was when Pivotal Labs was founded. So they've been pushing this in a very long time. And the emphasis is on collaboration and sustainability, continuousness of delivery. Getting, like, you go in, you work, there's not this overtime or crunch time. You work set hours, you work with a pair, which is that like moment to moment collaboration where two programmers work together using the same computer, like two sets of keyboards and mice plugged into the same computer and two monitors showing the same thing that they're looking at and sitting side by side, and pair programming, developing software together. Also very evidence and experience based, in that you write a test and then you write the software that makes it pass. And Agile or Pivotal is notorious, Pivotal Labs especially, for being extreme on this, for being some of the most ardent supporters of, like, we pair all the time. We don't just use pair programming sometimes. You pair as close to 100% of the time as possible. And when I got this job, that's actually what I had some other contacts out in the wider software industry, and they were like, yeah, Pivotal's a great place to work as long as you like pairing. And I didn't know. I had no idea if I like pairing or not. I like the idea. I like the collaboration. I like buzzword. But I got to Pivotal, and it's this big open office space, and there's, an abundance of complimentary snacks and places to do whatever you need to do. And I experienced two things that I had never experienced before. And I'd been in a number of other roles before I got into software. I'd been in a number of other companies. I'd done a bunch of things. I'd been a printer repairman and worked tech support. And I worked in a game store right after I got out of AVS, or actually while I was still at AVS, I was working in a game store. And I had still never experienced either of these two things. One was, it was a workspace that felt like home. Like, it felt like the main room in Pivotal. And people weren't having this sort of free-ranging conversation, but they were all having much smaller conversations. But when everyone's working together like that, when you've got a floor full of people pairing, there's just a dull roar of conversation, in which it feels perfectly safe to talk or be loud or express ideas. And then the other thing that I had never experienced in my adult life was that there was that I went in there for a full day interview, and we paired, and I spent the full day working there. And at the end of it, having watched all these people around me for the whole day, I realized I had never seen a whole building of adults actually working all day before. Like, none of this sitting around or, browsing Reddit or, any of the various things that people do instead of working. Just for their, to save their minds from this sort of relentless crystalline focus that businesses often think employees should exhibit, but employees never do and probably shouldn't. Instead, people worked sustainably, continuously all day, talking, typing, working through their problems. So it absolutely it reminded me of AVS like no environment I've ever been in other than AVS.
Yeah.
So that was 3 or 4 years ago, coming up on 4. And I started just as another guy with an expertise in exploratory testing who they decided to call an engineer. I didn't even know how to program. I mean, I knew a little bit. I had a little bit of self-taught programming stuff, but through the magic of self-education and pairing, I've been the lead on a engineering team for over a year. I just successfully handed it off to another guy, which is another big part of how we work is with constant rotation, moving between projects and getting involved in different things so that you don't get stuck on one thing forever. And I just couldn't have conceived of being sort of a senior engineer in a big and renowned process and software company prior to finding out that that's what I should do.
Well, that sounds wonderful.
And it's very interesting because when I was at AVS, I looked at what I was drawn to and interested in, and I thought maybe I should write games. Maybe I should write game systems. But I couldn't find any path from that to making offensive amounts of money. And then, so I just didn't pursue that. I resigned that to a hobby or a retirement thing that I would just keep an eye on. And as soon as I found software development and exploratory testing and XP and everything that Pivotal does, it snapped into focus that here's that systems focus. Here's that human, anthropological angle of trying to figure out why people are doing things and understanding what their actual motivations and needs are. Here it all is. And this you can get paid for.
Yeah, that's great. So you were able to draw that connection even all those years later. Yeah. Awesome. So I want to close by asking if you have a favorite memory of AVS that you'd like to share. So
I have a contention problem here, but also a fuzziness problem. So much of my time at AVS was so pleasant and consistently good.
That's good to hear.
Choosing a favorite is very hard, and I can be tempted towards moments where I still remember the quotes that something said, or something that someone said. But out of context, those are, aside from being maybe you had to be there things, also not the sort of things that you necessarily repeat.
Right, and probably not the best PR.
Yeah, it turns out that the things that children say to each other all day are not always perfect PR.
No.
I will pick a non-favorite memory that nonetheless sort of is a volunteer memory for the position.
Okay.
My parents were moving from Evergreen down to Arvada, and we were having a house built so that we could be closer to the school. But the house was being built, and we were living in an apartment in the meantime. And I had a bike, and I knew that it was 10 minutes drive where the house was being built from the school. And of course, no smartphone. I might have had a cell phone, but I don't even think I had a cell phone. But I did have the open campus policy and a bike. And some vague idea of where this place was, and I'd visited it by car. And so I loaded up my backpack, my like camelback of water and some snacks and some money because I think I bought lunch. And I just went looking for where the house was being built. And I didn't find it. I came back after a day of biking around Arvada trying to find this place, exhausted and disappointed. But I did learn that Ralston is nonsense. And
it still is.
You can't use Ralston to navigate, and that it's discontinuous and maybe a time warp. But I really liked the experience because I felt like that was just fine. Like if I wanted to go off and do this little spirit quest thing. And I think now that I mention that, this is conjuring up other memories of various times where you could just go off campus and spend some time navigating the world on your own terms without a lot of support or help. And you have a safe place to go back to. People know roughly where you're going. It's different now with cell phones, I guess. But like that said, I have a lot of good memories of just going off to explore and to find things. And I went and found lacrosse balls in the neighboring park, or golf balls in the area around the golf club near where the campus was. And that kind of being able to just get away and wander was very important in a way that I don't think I realized until I started talking about that memory.
Well, that sounds like a good one. Going out and getting lost, or not getting lost, but not finding what you were looking for.
Not finding the thing. I always knew how to get back.
But maybe it was the journey, not the destination, right?
I mean, the intent was the destination. In retrospect, the journey, sure. But.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jessie. That was a great, great talk, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your valuable insights.
Yeah, it was absolutely a pleasure.
Wandering is not always good PR, especially in an age where GPA and test scores speak more readily to a student's standing than their overall satisfaction with life. Nevertheless, a wealth of unstructured time is an enormous benefit to young people, as many of our graduates can attest. Last week on the show, Alder, a 10-year-old student at AVS, talked about letting it sink in and adjusting to the school as a new student. Here again, Jessie mentions taking some time to just wander and explore, letting the baggage of his previous schooling experience fall away. There is a very real and necessary adjustment period for students transitioning to Alpine Valley School. The first few weeks can be a challenging time, with students trying to find their way and perhaps bumping up against the judicial system as they learn the rules. Meanwhile, parents are looking for any reassurance that they've made the right choice and their child is not going to end up lagging behind their peers. All I can say for those who might be right in the thick of such an experience is this: give it time. The kids will figure it out, probably faster than you think, and the results, while not immediately obvious, will become clear. I have seen generations of AVS students experience tremendous growth, and I am routinely surprised by the leaps and bounds of maturity, responsibility, and competence I see from students the longer they spend at our school. There are growing pains, no doubt about it, but the end result is totally worth those initial moments of discomfort. I promise. As always, if you have an idea for an episode or want to hear about something specific, contact me at the show email, podcast@alpinevalley.school.com. I love hearing your feedback and getting ideas for future episodes. As always, I'm Missa Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks with more stories of real learning for real life.